you have to watch out when you get on that scale, because it turns out that what's in your mind can really influence what happens with your metabolism. When you see that number on the scale, if you're not happy with it, your metabolism will slow down just because of your what's called body image dissatisfaction. So it may be better not to weigh yourself every day.
Here's a crazy question. I mean, literally, should I just throw my scale in the trash?
Yes.
Okay. You heard it here, folks. America's garbage cans are going to be full of bathroom scales. This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm your host, Mark Wright, along with Dr. Emily Cooper and Andrea Taylor. It's so great to have you here.
Hello.
Great to be here. Hi.
All right. On the show today, tech, gadgets, and your metabolism, and what works and what doesn't. So when we talk about these tech gadgets, what sort of categories are we looking at?
I kind of think of them in actually just two different categories, if you think about it, because there are gadgets that we can purchase that can actually directly measure something about us. And those are actually not very many things in that category. Then there are other gadgets that are not really directly measuring, but they're making assumptions. And so when you look at it, the thing to think about is it directly measuring something in my body, or is it just making assumptions about me based on just calculations of the normal population predicted levels?
But I guess the real question, Dr. Cooper, is why do we have all these gadgets? I mean, when it comes right down to it, we don't need these things to be healthy, do we?
No, we definitely don't need them to be healthy. And it's understandable why people want to know more about their body and what it's doing and how it's working. And I think it can get to cross a line where it actually becomes unhealthy to be looking to such outside sources for answers about our body, because our body gives us a lot of messages internally that are just automatic. And if we turn to these external sources to a large extent, we kind of lose our instinct and our perception of ourselves, and we're relying and over relying on this outside technology. So I think it's a way people feel like they can take control of things in their life. So it's not just that they want to measure things. They're looking for those things to give them the answers to solve problems as well. And so that's where we can sometimes take a wrong turn.
Yeah.
But don't you think sometimes we want like the magic answer to everything? Like if we think, oh, it's out there, we can measure it and we know that it's out there. And if we see that, we can fix it.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. And unfortunately, it's not that good. It's kind of like AI. It only can go so far. It can give you some information, but then you have to think about, well, how accurate is the information? And what about the interpretation? How do I interpret that information?
Well, it's like you always said at the gym when you looked at the thing on the treadmill that said, "Oh, you just, used 50 calories or 100 calories," which of course I would translate as like, "Oh, I could have half a bagel for that." But like that doesn't mean that because
No.
it's not necessarily accurate, and also you shouldn't translate it into food. But that's not always right.
Yeah, because that's actually measuring the equipment, not you. It's measuring the speed, the incline, the watts, whatever you're doing on that equipment, but it's not measuring anything about you personally. So that's what I
That's
mean
so
by it's
rude.
not a direct measurement of you versus something like a heart rate monitor. A heart rate monitor is actually measuring your heart rate, but the gym
So,
equipment is not measuring you, it's measuring the equipment.
but even those heart rate monitors, like I bought the little heart rate monitor because the big one was too complicated. So I bought the little one that goes on my wrist. And even when I use it, like I'll do it 3 times and I do get sometimes 3 different numbers.
Yeah, that's the thing too, because a lot of things will affect the accuracy of the measurement. And so some of that is the methodology that's used in the equipment, because heart rate monitors can use all kinds of different types of technology, but and certain things can influence it as well. So for example, if you're wearing one of those little heart rate detectors that goes on your finger that also measures your oxygen
Oh,
saturation.
yeah, I got one of
Yeah.
those.
Those, if your circulation is not good or say you're anemic, they may not pick up all of it. And in fact, if you have dark skin and it may not pick up all of
Hmm.
the reading. Yeah,
What?
that's something new that they found during our pandemic is that people with dark skin, sometimes those oximeters that pick up your heart rate and your oxygen level, they overestimate your oxygen level. And so some people that were really struggling with their breathing were missed when they were only using that as a technology to detect it. So there's all kinds of things and that can go wrong. I think the main thing is why do we want to know this information? First of all, what do you intend to do with it? Are you just observing, or are you going to then trust that information so much that it's going to change your behavior? You know, you're going to use that information to make a choice to change your behavior in some area, you know, because you think it's going to lead to that magic answer or change your health. And that's where maybe that's not really true. Maybe your reasoning isn't quite right. Like you can observe the
Hmm.
information, but you kind of have to figure out how much of it is accurate and what is it really telling me? And does it really mean that if I change my behavior, there's going to be some kind of health improvement?
Yeah. I think we have time to go through a lot of these
Yeah.
gadgets, but I'd love to start out with the gadget that I think we all use. Just about every day, I get on the scale and look at and see what my weight is. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm just always kind of curious. But Dr. Cooper, talk about just the bathroom scale as a gadget that we use. And I'm guessing that it's not a great indicator of health, is it?
It is not, and you have to watch out when you get on that scale because it turns out that what's in your mind can really influence what happens with your metabolism. When you see that number on the scale, if you're not happy with it, your metabolism will slow down just because of your what's called body image dissatisfaction. So, it may be better not to weigh yourself every day.
You know, do you here's a crazy question. I mean, literally, should I just throw my scale in the trash?
Yes.
Okay. You heard it here, folks. America's garbage cans are gonna be full of bathroom scales.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a good practice, I don't think. But, and then some of the scales will tell you your percent body fat and things like that. And it does it through a technology. It's called impedance testing, where it's kind of sending signals through your body and seeing how much that signal is impeded. And based on that, can detect fat versus lean mass potentially. But things like your hydration status, your dietary status, all of that influences it. And it can, be wildly different depending on where you are in terms of your hydration and whether you're avoiding carbs, for example, things that would influence your muscle, water weight, and things like that. So those also are not necessarily accurate enough to be valuable, but if people want to look at trends, they could try to control the environment and the way that they're doing the testing to make sure that it's the same each time and then monitor the trends. knowing that the numbers may not be accurate.
Hmm.
Wow.
I'd love to, we talked a little bit about the machines at the gym, and it really seems like those machines are just kind of a gross approximation of what might be happening inside of a human body. I'd love, Dr. Cooper, for you to contrast those machines at the gym to the equipment that you have used, very expensive equipment to measure the effluent, the outflow of air coming from our lungs. Like, that's at the very other end of the spectrum in terms of accuracy. How does that machine work by comparison?
Yes, it's a dramatic difference. And actually, the fitness equipment companies vary. Some of them, they're just doing the same formulas. There's predicted formulas of if you're going this fast and you're, and you're even if it's collecting your heart rate and your heart rate is this, then probably you're burning this many calories. It's based on equations applied to the general population. That's just not accurate for most people because most people are not going to fall into that exact measurement at all. But then some of the fitness equipment companies do use companies like my company has done this for some fitness equipment companies where they have a piece of fitness equipment and they want to build in better, more accurate equations into the machine. And so they have us run a variety of different types of people through different settings of the machine wearing that equipment, the gas exchange system. It's called indirect calorimetry. And you wear a mask and it has to capture all of your breath to be accurate. So it has to be very well sealed. And it has to not only measure the content of the oxygen and carbon dioxide in the air, but it also has to measure the volume, the amount of air that's going in and out, and the amount of that content. So, and then by doing that, it can actually predict how many calories that particular individual is burning and how much of it is coming from carbohydrates versus fats and things like that. And if you combine a 24-hour urine test, you can even find out how much protein is actually being used. So it's a very high tech. But some companies have actually done that. And then they try to modify those general equations and make them more a little bit apply to a little bit more of the population or get a little bit more in the ballpark for people, but they're still not going to be accurate. And there's a lot of pressure with fitness equipment companies because even if they do the accurate testing of their equipment, they may not put that formula in the equipment because that might make it so that they're not competitive with other pieces of equipment that are kind of inflating the amount of calorie burning. So it's all kind of a big game there, and there's nobody monitoring it. So when you get on these different pieces of equipment, it says you're burning X calories. It's just not it's not reliable at all. Unfortunately.
That's so
So
sad.
So Andrea, you've shared on the podcast. I'm laughing because a few episodes back, Andrea shared with us that she went to a gym when she was younger called
Slenderella.
Slenderella, which was a gym full of gadgets that actually did the work for you.
Come on, it sounded like a good idea. Doesn't it? I mean, at the time when we didn't know that much about exercise and fitness,
Sure.
it sounded really good that the thing would go around and around and do all the exercise for you and tell you that you were doing really well.
I'm just picturing Andrea with leg warmers and a headband
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did have
and
nice
the
outfits for it.
disco music.
I could see
Yeah,
that
Andrea,
being
have you?
I could see that being
yeah.
resurrected now.
It was so good. It was
It
so
would be
good.
so
It
popular
would
now.
be.
It really was
Man, I
so
had a
good.
great workout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sore.
Oof, oof.
Andrea, have you've shared also on the podcast that when you were a kid, you started, you were put on diets since about the age of 8. You've tried every diet in the book, and as we've
Yeah.
said, they all worked until they didn't. But when it comes to gadgets, did you ever get any gadgets that sort of tracked any of this stuff,
There was
Andrea?
some kind of belt or something I think that we bought. I think my mother bought something. I think we bought like a belt thing. It wasn't the thing that shook your tushy like in the 50s, that thing that shook your tushy that, shook the fat off,
Yeah,
which
like the belt that kind of
yeah,
wraps around
like
your
yeah,
your
that I
hips.
Love Lucy,
Yeah.
I think, had that. And then there was like a steam thing that you would go in a box, which I mean, God, if that worked, I would have gone in that. But there was some kind of heat belt, and I actually saw a commercial for it. It was some kind of it was called a lipo wrap, and you put it on. It said I think I got it on my Instagram, and, I get a lot of things as I've told you, I get a lot of things that Instagram tells me I want, and sometimes I click, and then, but this was a lipo wrap, and you put it on like a belt, and it just melts everything away. And I mean, if that would work, oh my god. But I know in my brain that's not gonna do it. But then you see these things like on TV, like the thing they put a needle in you and suck it, like liposuction. So this
Yeah.
seemed like an at-home version. But it in my head, I was like, that's like do-it-yourself surgery. Not a good thing.
No.
Yeah.
Not a good thing.
I think we should talk about that. Dr. Cooper, what does when someone undergoes liposuction, um, what happens to the metabolism in terms of the brain sort of understanding what the lay of the land is, and what happens when people get liposuction?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, but we recommend against doing liposuction because it can actually really backfire. Right at first, removing certain amount of body fat artificially that way, like just by taking it out of your body, what happens is leptin, this famous hormone we always talk about, but from the body fat, a very important hormone, that leptin level will drop. And when it does that, it gives the brain the perception that you lost a tremendous amount of weight that's unhealthy, that's dangerous. And so then it starts to trigger weight gain through alterations in your metabolism. And you can gain a tremendous amount of weight, especially this happens to people that don't have a lot of body fat to begin with. Um, or people who start out with a low leptin level due to past diets, a lot of diets that they've been on in the past. But I have seen people gain up to 70 pounds rapidly after liposuction.
And that's because the fat itself produces the
Yeah,
hormone?
the fat produces a beneficial hormone called leptin that
Mhm.
helps reassure our brain and the rest of our body that we have adequate body fat stores. And
Wow.
yeah, and unfortunately, with dieting, that leptin can become suppressed to begin with. So then, if you go into a procedure like liposuction, they remove the fat and then your leptin levels tank even more. And that triggers your brain to perceive extreme famine, dangerously low body weight, even though it's not. It's not low. It's just maybe normal. But your brain is perceiving that your body weight is in a very unhealthy low range. And so it will make these alterations to your metabolism to enable rapid fat regain. And so it's really very powerful when you see it happen.
Wow, so you really can't game the system, right? When it comes to your brain's ability to figure out what's going on in the body.
No, you can't trick it. It's too sophisticated. It's too smart.
Wow.
It's meant to protect us from famine, really. And so it's going to be really powerful. The best thing to do is to avoid all of that. That's why we get a little bit concerned about people that want to biohack so much and track, calories in, calories out, because we know that doesn't work anyway. And now with these new gadgets that supposedly will measure your metabolism that you just like blow into, I mean, that is a real, what I'd call a real dumbed down version of what we were describing before, where you wear a mask that captures all your air and it's very sophisticated. This is a very rudimentary version of that. That just isn't going to be accurate or very helpful at all. But people want to know, what am I burning and what am I eating and how many calories is that? And then they use the apps and the scales and the things to monitor that too. And that's the question, is why are we doing this? And is just our behavior around all of that, is that weakening our metabolism and making us more prone to going the opposite direction of what people are actually trying to achieve by doing that?
It's kind of like adding to all the stress that then messes with your
Yeah.
metabolism to begin with, it because it's like it's creating some sort of stressful food diary that they used to make you do, write down every
Yeah.
morsel of food that you smell or eat or whatever.
Yeah.
I think just Dr. Cooper, the idea that you raised in this episode, and you've talked about it before, but I don't think the average person has any idea that worrying about weight and worrying about food is enough to cause your metabolism to change. I mean, that's a radical, radical thing that the average person has no idea because we're looking at these gadgets as if all we're doing is measuring the calories in and calories out. That's all we're doing, right? But it's this whole emotional connection between the brain and the body that is really the key, right?
It really is, and it's using something called our limbic system. Um, and our hypothalamus, which is this sophisticated laboratory detecting all our nutrient levels, interacting with that limbic system, which is our emotional kind of perception of things. And then our planning of what we plan to do about it all. All of that is taken into consideration to determine whether our brain needs to take action to protect us from overspending energy, basically based on that
So the
environment.
obs- so the obsession leads to not being able to lose any weight.
Exactly. And maybe promoting more weight gain than you had before you started to be so concerned about it. I mean, there is something to say about getting organized with your food and making sure that you are on a consistent eating schedule, not over obsessing about it, but just being consistent with that and not just being totally haphazard. But beyond that, what we really don't want to be doing is eating food at the same time that you're thinking, "Oh, how many calories is that?" And, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't eat this much," or, "Well, I'll just exercise after." I mean, that is called eating restraint, and that is what really can cause all your hormones to just go into a defensive mode.
Okay, let's talk about a gadget that I think you would agree has some benefit, and that is the blood pressure monitor. Can you talk about the differences, Dr. Cooper? I think there's like a cuff version, like a simpler version versus the band that goes on your on your bicep area.
Yes.
What talk about blood pressure monitors and the proper sort of role in our health.
Yeah, and doctors love blood pressure monitors. And we also love patients doing their own blood pressure checks too, because studies have shown that it is reliable, to have patients monitor their blood pressure. In fact, a lot of times you do get a better, more accurate picture if you have patients monitor over a period of time, different times of day or a specific time of day, the blood pressure. But the monitors matter. Like the we talked in a previous episode about the size of the cuff needs to be really
Right.
fit you properly, and they're marked, and so you should be able to make sure that it fits properly. If it's too small, it'll read artificially high. If it's too large, it'll read artificially low. So you have to be within the parameters of the cuff size. And I'm not a big fan of the wrist monitors. I know they're easier, but they tend to register higher and they're not very predictable. There might be situations where you have to use that, but I prefer the cuff is much, much better and a properly fitted cuff. But then you probably didn't know you're supposed to sit rested for a couple minutes, have your feet firmly planted on the ground, and you're supposed to empty your bladder first
Hmm.
to get it
Not
accurate.
while you're doing your blood
Yeah,
pressure,
right.
right?
Not
Ah.
like, but that makes the reading much more accurate. And people also are not aware that our blood pressure is usually the highest in the morning when we wake up.
So when you tell your patients, "Hey, I want you to keep track of your blood pressure and write it down," what's the appropriate way to do that and journal it?
I prefer people because our blood pressure is the highest in the morning when we wake up. I like them to measure it within an hour of waking up in the morning. And the reason it's higher is because it's stressful for our body to go from sleep to awake. And so the stress hormones are highest there and it really aggravates it. But that's also why most strokes and heart attacks occur in the morning, in the early morning.
Wow.
And so when we take blood pressure medicine, you want to take it at night so that it's really active in your system in those early morning hours. But so the time of day you measure it is important. And, your doctor might not care if you measured in the morning or not, but I prefer to see that high point in the morning. And you want to do all the process you're supposed to, which is empty the bladder, have your feet firmly planted on the ground, sit for a couple of minutes, get a good measurement, and then there's the upper number, which is the systolic, the lower number, which is the diastolic, and most blood pressure monitors also give you a heart rate. So then ideally, you either want to store that in the memory of the monitor and then print it out, or just document those 3 numbers and the time of day. And any other notes that you have about, "Oh, I didn't get any sleep last night," or "I forgot to take my blood pressure medicine last night," things like that that might be pertinent. And then we usually recommend tracking it over a period of time, because one reading isn't really enough. In fact, if you go to your physician's office, they really want to see 3 elevated readings before they put you on, like, a blood pressure medicine, unless it's
Mm.
super high. So if you could just track over time, a couple of times a week, maybe for a few weeks, to get a sense of what it's doing. But again, we don't want to over obsess about it.
Yeah, yeah. But Dr. Cooper, you take that within an hour of getting up, but then do you wanna take it maybe midday and then before bed, or does it matter when you report back to your doctor?
I don't, well, there are times where, depending on the time of day that you're taking certain medicines, you might want to get it checked when that medicine is at its low point. Like, say you take your blood pressure medicine at night. Well, you might wanna check another one right before you take it at night, so that would be when the blood pressure medicine is at its lowest point in your system, and you wanna make sure that your blood pressure is not, is fully under control at that time as well. So that might be a good time, but I think it's individual, based on the individual, like, when you wanna take it, how many times you wanna take it before reporting, and it probably is a good idea to take it twice, instead of just once, because if you just were sitting down, even though you were sitting for a couple minutes, if you see that after you took it a second time, the numbers are much lower, then you might want to say, well, let me check it one more time. So if those first two don't correlate, you may want to even check a third time. But
And what do you think are the good numbers again?
well, with the new guidelines, they're so strict, but below 120 over 80. So upper number less than 120, lower number less than 80. That is
Right.
what's considered optimal for adults. Kids, it's a little bit different. Kids should be lower, and that's based more on their height, actually, and their gender and their age.
Let's talk about smartwatches, Dr.
Yeah.
Cooper, and the data that they can give us. Is there any value to knowing what your heart rate is? And I think some of the watches claim that they can measure the quality of your sleep at night. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I'd love your opinion on that.
Yeah, the watches I think are pretty amazing. The technology in them has really come a long way. So they now are actually measuring something in you. And they do it through a combination of light emissions that are bouncing off your system, and also electrical input. So some of the more sophisticated ones not only can measure your heart rate, but also your actual EKG, like, as if, your electrical signals of your heart. And some of them are can be life-saving, because they actually can detect arrhythmias, which are irregular heart rhythms. And so I know, even with my own patients, they've had warnings that came up through their iWatches and things like that, and different technology that can detect that. Some of the sleep monitors don't really do the EKG component. It's just a light type of thing to try to see, is your heart rate slowed down? Is it speeding up? So the sleep technology so far is good, but it's not as good as they claim it to be. And so we're looking at, like, new things that are going to be coming out soon, I think. And I think Andrea knows of some kind of sleep gadget that's coming.
Yeah.
But there are some new technologies coming for better sleep monitoring. Um,
I I do have to put in a plug for my nephew has something coming out called Oslo Sleep
hmm.
Buds, and they're a new kind of sleep bud that is created so that you can sleep better.
Oh,
And it will, like, they were designed for sleep so that other sleep buds are not designed for people sleeping. And he said that they will have stuff in them so that you can understand how you can sleep better.
Hmm.
Like there's information that can be programmed into them, I think, and it will analyze all the environmental stuff that's going on around you so that at the end of the night you can track what's been happening and you can personalize it for your own sleep. There's all kinds of information on it. I think they'll be available in January.
So that sounds like
So
something that's like, not really detecting your personal input, biologic input, but it's detecting your sleep environment and providing some input maybe on that to improve the quality, which is also good
it's
information.
all to improve the quality
Mhm.
of your
Hmm.
it's for your personal sleep.
Right.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I think it'll be a good product for anybody who's having problems or issues with continuous sleep.
Yeah, we talked in the past, Dr. Cooper, about the importance of getting good quality sleep because of the important hormones that
Definitely.
regulate metabolism. I wanted to just touch on something you just said, Dr. Cooper, about being really aware of arrhythmias in the heart. I know a guy who had, what's that called? Is it AFib? Is that what it's
Yeah,
called?
AFib is a common one. Mhm.
Yeah, and that's where the heart sort of
Mhm.
flutters, and because it's not pumping efficiently, it can lead to blood clots, and that led to a stroke.
Yes.
And so the blood clot forms in the heart, it goes up the neck into the brain, and then next thing you know, you have a stroke.
Exactly.
So these gadgets, if they can detect an arrhythmia, that could save your life.
It can, because especially dangerous ones can be the ones that like go in and out of the irregular rhythm. So you could be at your provider's clinic and they're not seeing anything irregular because that day it's normal. And so having these other devices that might pick it up, on those off times is really valuable because when it goes in and out of that regular irregular rhythm, it causes more propensity towards those clot formation and throwing the clots. So I think that's a great technology. And that technology came out quite a long time ago in the athletic world for just basic athletic heart rate monitoring with like the bands that you wear around your chest. They started to implement the EKG component of that long, long ago because by measuring the electrical impulses from the heart, you can actually tell a lot about an athlete's training in terms of their fatigue level and whether they're adapting to that workout. And so the problem with some of the technology around that, because if you're an athlete and you have that built into it, it's called heart rate variability. um, the problem is the interpretation that is made from that data is not always accurate. So the data itself is accurate, but then the gadgets have these programmed interpretations that come out that direct the athlete that you should take a recovery or you should do this. Those aren't necessarily accurate, the interpretive part of it.
Hmm. Yeah, you really need an expert.
Yeah, the technology
Yeah.
though has been there for gosh, more than a decade.
Well, this has been super informative and interesting. I think we need to recap what we've learned today, team. Andrea, any takeaways for you?
I think we've learned that there are many, many gadgets. Some work, some do not. And that there are a lot of them that are very, very expensive and maybe good and maybe bad. Don't trust everything you read.
Wow, that is good advice. And I think the other big takeaway, I have to ask my wife first because this is it's a shared piece of equipment, but I'm going to throw away my scale, Dr. Cooper, because the other big takeaway
Yeah.
is you cannot trick your
No,
brain.
and let your brain
Yeah,
rest from worrying about it and having to look at
no
that number.
don't obsess.
Yeah.
Don't obsess. Don't obsess.
Don't obsess and listen to your body.
All right, Dr. Emily Cooper, Andrea Taylor, this has been another edition of Fat Science. Thank you so much for being with us again today.
Thank you both.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
See you next week.
Bye.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.